In 2020, a Chinese submersible called Fendouzhe dropped to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11 kilometers beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The crew collected rock samples from a place darker and colder than outer space, and they planted a Chinese flag on the deepest known point on Earth. Beijing called it a scientific milestone, but what they did not tell anyone was that the dive was just the tip of a multi-billion undersea operation. It involves undersea surveillance networks, military listening posts, and a permanent manned base on the ocean floor. Almost none of it has anything to do with science. To understand what China is actually doing at the bottom of the sea, you need to start with the Mariana Trench itself. It sits in the western Pacific, about 200 kilometers east of the Mariana Islands and roughly south of Japan. The trench is crescent-shaped, stretching for over 2,500 kilometers, and reaches a maximum depth of nearly 11,000 meters at a point called the Challenger Deep. To put that in perspective, if you dropped Mount Everest into the trench, its peak would still be sitting more than 2 kilometers below the waterline. The pressure at the bottom is roughly 1,100 atmospheres, the equivalent of 2,000 African elephants pressing down on a single human body. Sunlight disappears entirely past about 1,000 meters. Below that, you are in perpetual blackness, where temperatures hover just above freezing and the silence is absolute. It is one of the most extreme environments on Earth, and for most of human history, it was completely unreachable. For decades, only a handful of manned expeditions had ever touched the bottom. The first was in 1960, when 2 men aboard the U.S. Navy bathyscaphe Trieste descended to roughly 10,916 meters. They reported seeing what they believed was a flatfish on the floor of the trench, though marine biologists later questioned whether it was actually a sea cucumber. It took another 52 years before filmmaker James Cameron repeated the descent in 2012 aboard the Deep-Sea Challenger. Then China entered the race, and the pace of exploration accelerated in a way nobody anticipated. Between 2012 and 2020, Beijing deployed an arsenal of deep-sea vehicles that no other nation could match. The Jiaolong submersible reached 7,062 meters in 2012 and began regular operations across the Pacific floor. Then came the Hailong remotely operated vehicle for mineral exploration at 3,500 meters. The Qianlong autonomous underwater vehicle surveyed polymetallic sulfide deposits at 6,000 meters. And in November 2020, the Fendouzhe completed its record-breaking dive to 10,909 meters in the Challenger Deep. But Fendouzhe was never a one-time stunt. As of recent reports, it has completed over 329 dives, with 25 of those going past the 10,000-meter mark. That makes China the global leader in deep-sea manned exploration by a wide margin. The manned capsule that keeps its crew alive under those crushing pressures was built entirely by the Institute of Metal Research at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The hydroacoustic communication system that lets it transmit data from 10 kilometers down took Chinese engineers almost a decade to perfect. And what Fendouzhe found down there was astonishing. Scientists cataloged 7,564 microbial species during their Mariana Trench missions, and nearly 90% of them had never been documented before. These organisms survive in total darkness, near freezing temperatures, and pressures that would crush a nuclear submarine. Chinese researchers believe these deep-sea microbes could unlock breakthroughs in biotechnology, from high-pressure chemical manufacturing to better organ preservation during long-duration spaceflight. However, the biology is not the real prize. The real prize is sitting on the ocean floor in the form of trillions of potato-sized rocks. Polymetallic nodules blanket vast stretches of the Pacific seabed, particularly across a region called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone between Hawaii and Mexico. These nodules contain massive concentrations of manganese, nickel, cobalt, and copper, the exact minerals that power electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, wind turbines, and military hardware. The numbers are staggering. The Pacific seabed alone holds roughly 5.7 times more manganese, 4 times more nickel, and over 10 times more cobalt than every known land-based reserve on the planet combined. China understood the value of these deposits earlier than almost anyone. In 2001, the China Ocean Mineral Resources Research and Development Association, known as COMRA, signed its first exploration contract with the International Seabed Authority. Since then, Beijing has expanded its international seabed claims to 86,000 square kilometers. In 2016, Chinese President Xi Jinping publicly ordered his government to master the technologies required to access what he called the treasures of the ocean. China now operates at least 12 major institutions dedicated to deep-sea research, and one of them, a sprawling campus in Wuxi, plan to hire 4,000 people by 2025. And here is why that matters so much. China already dominates the global supply chain for processing rare earth minerals on land. It controls roughly 60% of rare earth mining and nearly 90% of rare earth processing worldwide. If Beijing can lock down the deep-sea mining supply chain as well, it would hold leverage over the raw materials that every advanced economy on the planet needs to build electric vehicles, fighter jets, missile guidance systems, and renewable energy infrastructure. That is not speculation. That is the explicit goal laid out in Chinese government policy documents. But this is where the story takes a much darker turn. Because while Beijing was publicly framing all of this as peaceful ocean science, at the same time, China was simultaneously building something far more strategic beneath the waves. It is called the Underwater Great Wall. In 2015, the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, a state-owned defense contractor, announced plans to construct a massive network of undersea sensors across the South China Sea. The system would combine hydroacoustic arrays on the seabed, fiber optic cable sensors, autonomous underwater vehicles, unmanned surface vessels, and deep-sea listening stations, all connected through a layered command network that stretches from the ocean floor to satellite constellations in orbit. Western defense analysts quickly realized what this really was. It was China's version of America's Cold War-era SOSUS network, the sound surveillance system that tracked Soviet submarines across the Atlantic. But the Chinese version is significantly more advanced. According to a 2025 analysis published in Defense One, the network consists of 5 interconnected layers. The top layer is a satellite constellation that uses pulsed laser signals to map ocean surfaces. Below that, smart buoys and unmanned surface vessels relay data. Deeper still, autonomous gliders and underwater drones patrol below the thermal layer, profiling the ocean environment and carrying acoustic payloads. The 4th layer consists of seabed observatories and cabled hubs that host passive sensor arrays, provide docking and recharging for unmanned vehicles, and serve as permanent listening posts. The 5th layer is the command brain that fuses all this data together in real time. And the most alarming detail is this. Since 2016, China has been operating 2 underwater sensors positioned in the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench and near the island of Yap in Micronesia. According to multiple reports, these sensors have the acoustic range to detect submarine movements at United States Naval Base Guam, one of America's most critical military installations in the Pacific. Think about what that means. China has positioned listening equipment at the deepest point on Earth, in international waters, with the ability to monitor one of America's most important submarine bases in real time. In 2025, researchers at Beijing's Beijing University unveiled a miniature deep-sea drone no larger than a briefcase, built from smart metal actuators that convert extreme water pressure into propulsion. This tiny robot can swim, glide, and crawl across the floor of the Mariana Trench at depths exceeding 10 kilometers, in conditions where no American-made equivalent can operate. U.S. Navy officials have testified before Congress that this network is designed to erode America's undersea stealth advantage, the single greatest military edge the United States has held since the Cold War. But even the surveillance network is only part of the picture. The centerpiece of China's deep ocean ambitions is something that sounds like it belongs in a science fiction film. China is building the world's first permanent manned deep-sea station. The facility, which Beijing has nicknamed the Deep Sea Space Station, would sit approximately 2,000 meters below the surface of the South China Sea. That is roughly half the depth of the sunken Titanic wreckage off the coast of Canada. It would house up to 6 scientists at a time for stays lasting as long as 1 month, making it by far the most ambitious underwater habitat ever constructed. The station's stated purpose is to study cold seep ecosystems, monitor volcanic activity, and explore methane hydrate deposits as a potential energy source. Cold seeps are cracks in the seafloor where chemical-rich fluids escape, creating unique ecosystems teeming with bizarre life forms that do not depend on sunlight. China expects to complete the facility by 2030. No nation has ever attempted to keep humans alive at this depth for that long. The China Ship Scientific Research Center, which is leading the project, previously proposed a nuclear-powered underwater mining station capable of housing 33 crew members for up to 2 months. That earlier concept was backed by China's 863 program, a classified technology fund that has financed some of the country's most sensitive military research. Analysts have pointed out the obvious. A permanent underwater base in the South China Sea, positioned near China's submarine fleet at the Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island, would serve dual purposes whether Beijing admits it or not. It would function as both a research lab and a forward military observation post, feeding real-time intelligence directly into the underwater Great Wall network. And the United States is only now beginning to respond. In 2025, the Trump administration signed an executive order directing agencies to fast-track permits for seabed mineral exploration and commercial mining around American territories, including the Northern Mariana Islands and American Samoa. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management began initiating the process to lease deep-sea mining plots in the South Pacific. But a Rand Corporation study warned that despite these efforts, China already dominates the midstream processing of critical minerals, meaning that even if American companies pull nodules off the sea floor, Beijing still controls the refinery bottleneck. As one Rand analyst put it, seabed mining could become yet another resource that China dominates within a few years of a regulatory framework being established. Multiple mining companies told researchers they had been subject to aggressive outreach from Chinese firms seeking to lock down processing contracts. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is watching China's sensor network expand toward the East China Sea, the maritime Silk Road corridors, and potentially into polar waters. Rear Admiral Mike Brooks testified that China views undersea warfare as central to what they call systems confrontation, integrating every layer of ocean sensing into a single command architecture designed to locate, track, and, if necessary, neutralize American submarines before they can act. The bottom of the Mariana Trench used to be one of the last places on Earth that no government could claim. A pitch-black, freezing, silent world nearly 11 kilometers below the waves, where the pressure could crush steel and where life itself was barely understood. But China has turned it into the newest front in the global competition for power, resources, and control of the oceans. The question now is whether anyone else can catch up, or whether by the time the rest of the world pays attention, the deep sea will already belong to Beijing. If this story surprised you, you should see what we found when we looked into China's other hidden military projects. That video is on screen now.